The morning Marcus Hale pulled into the Vantage Tower parking structure, the sky over downtown Keller City was the color of old pewter, heavy and low, the kind of sky that makes ordinary men feel small. He drove slowly, the way a man drives, when he is carrying more than he can say out loud. His daughter Emma was buckled into the back seat, 7 years old, her backpack shaped like a ladybug, her hair in 2 uneven pigtails. Because Marcus had done them himself again that morning. Standing in the bathroom mirror at 5:45 fingers, learning what her mother's fingers once knew automatically, Emma was singing something low and tuneless, under her breath. A habit she had picked up in the last year, this private music she made when the world was too loud, and she needed her own sound to hold on to. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and something moved through his chest. Not pain exactly, but the cousin of it, that pressure that lives between love and grief when they share the same address inside a man's body. He smiled at her reflection. She did not notice. She was somewhere inside her song. The car itself was a 1994 Ford Mustang, once candy apple red, now faded to the color of dried rust and old ambition. The passenger side mirror was held on with electrical tape and a prayer. The right rear quarter panel had a dent the size of a cantaloupe that Marcus kept meaning to get fixed, had been meaning to for about 14 months, which happened to be exactly how long ago his wife Rebecca had died in a hospital bed. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the diagnosis, leaving him alone with a 6-year-old girl and a stack of medical bills that made his knees buckle when he finally opened them. The Mustang had been his car before she died. His project car, his weekend dream. He had told Rebecca 100 times that someday he was going to restore it to factory perfect. She had laughed and said, "Marcus, you say that every spring." She was right every spring. Now it was the only car he had and he drove it every day, and he no longer thought about restoring it the way he used to. He just drove it. It got him to work. It got Emma to school. Some days that was enough of a miracle. He found a spot on the 3rd level of the Vantage Tower parking structure, level 3 being the only level where the ceiling was high enough that he did not feel the walls pressing in. He helped Emma down from the back seat, adjusted her backpack straps, kissed her forehead. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo he had found on sale at the drugstore. 2 bottles for $3. A small victory in the long arithmetic of single-parent budgeting. He told her Mrs. Delgado from the 4th floor would pick her up from school at 3:15. Emma nodded solemnly, like someone being briefed on mission-critical intelligence. He watched her walk toward the elevator, her ladybug backpack bobbing, and he stood very still until the doors closed around her. Only then did he turn back toward his car to grab his laptop bag. That was when he heard the laughter. It came from across the parking level, near the reserved spaces where the executive vehicles sat gleaming like promises. A black Tesla Model S, a silver Mercedes AMG, a white Range Rover, so clean it looked like it had never been driven outside of a commercial, and standing beside the Range Rover in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months, was Devin Croft, CEO of Vantage Capital Group, Marcus's boss's boss's boss, a man who had been featured in Keller City Business Journal, 3 issues in a row under the headline Unstoppable. A man with the kind of jawline that seemed specifically designed to appear in magazine photographs and say things like disruption and paradigm without ridiculous. He was standing with 2 other men in suits whose names Marcus did not know, and all 3 of them were looking at the Mustang, looking at it and laughing, not quietly, not discreetly. The way men laugh when they have never had to be careful about who hears them. Devin Croft pointed at the electrical tape on the mirror, said something Marcus could not fully make out but caught enough of. Something about a tetanus shot. Something about a museum. Something about whether the car ran on gasoline or dignity. The other 2 men doubled over. One of them took out his phone. Marcus stood with his laptop bag strap in his hand, and felt the heat come up through his collar, felt it reach his face, felt it settle behind his eyes, like something that had been waiting a long time for permission to arrive. He was 34 years old. He had a dead wife and a daughter who sang to herself, and a rusted car, and a job as a mid-level data analyst on the 14th floor of this building, where he had worked for 6 years, without a single promotion. He stood there and breathed through his nose and said nothing. Because what do you say? Because Emma had just gone up in that elevator, because he had a 9 o'clock meeting, and a mortgage that was 43 days behind, and a daughter who needed him to still be employed tomorrow. He picked up his bag. He walked to the elevator. He pushed the button for 14. He stood with his hands at his sides, and his jaw set, and his eyes on the doors, and he made himself a promise in the rising quiet of that elevator. It was not a loud promise. It was not a dramatic one. It was the kind of promise man makes when he has finally run out of things to lose. The 14th floor of Vantage Capital Group smelled like recycled air and ambition. A specific combination of carpet cleaner and expensive coffee and the low electrical hum of people performing competence at their desks. Marcus had worked here for 6 years. He knew every face, every quirk, every unspoken rule of the floor. He knew that Janet from compliance always heated fish in the break room on Thursdays, and nobody had the courage to say anything. He knew that Kyle in risk management refreshed his LinkedIn profile approximately 11 times a day. He knew that the good printer on the south wall jammed if you tried to print more than 40 pages at once, and he knew this because he had fixed it himself, twice without being asked, and both times someone else had received a thank you email from the floor manager. He had learned long ago that on the 14th floor, credit flowed upward, the way water was supposed to flow downhill, naturally, inevitably, without anyone needing to arrange it. His desk was in a cluster of 4, near the window overlooking the parking structure. He sat down, opened his laptop, and pulled up the project he had been working on. For the past 3 weeks, a market segmentation analysis for the Croft Initiative, Vantage Capital's new flagship investment strategy, that Devin Croft had announced at the all-hands meeting in January, with the particular brand of breathless certainty that CEOs deploy when they have already decided the answer and are simply waiting for the numbers to confirm them. The Croft Initiative was Devin's baby, his legacy project, the thing he was going to stamp his name on. The idea was to identify emerging micro-markets in secondary cities, populations under 500,000, where real estate development, retail infrastructure, and digital access were all simultaneously underinvested. Find the gaps, pour capital in ahead of the curve. Ride the wave, simple in theory, brutally complex in the data. Marcus had been assigned to the project 3 weeks ago, not as a lead analyst, not as a project manager, but as a data support resource, which was the company's polite way of saying he was there to pull numbers and format spreadsheets, and not have ideas out loud. His direct supervisor, a 31-year-old taste person who wore pocket squares and had an MBA from a school whose name he inserted into every third sentence, was the project lead. Preston was perfectly pleasant and almost entirely decorative in terms of actual analytical contribution, a fact that the numbers in Marcus's spreadsheets made quietly, devastatingly clear if you knew how to read them. Marcus knew how to read them. He had been reading data for 6 years. He was, by any honest accounting, very good at his job. He was simply not very good at the performance of his job, which in his experience was a different skill set entirely, and one he had never been able to fake. He opened his analysis and began to work. Around him the floor filled and buzzed, and the coffee machine ran through its cycles. Preston stopped by at 9:45, glanced at Marcus's screen without really looking at it, said something about needing the segment 3 numbers by end of day and moved on. Marcus said he would have them by noon. Preston looked mildly surprised and then walked away. At 11:30, Marcus sent the segment 3 analysis to Preston. At 11:52, Preston forwarded the analysis to the project team with a covering note that said in 2 paragraphs, essentially what Marcus's analysis said, in Marcus's words, reorganized slightly, with Preston's name in the header. Marcus read the forwarded email. He breathed through his nose. He went back to his work. But something was different today. Something had shifted in the parking garage at 8:15, in that moment when Devin Croft's laughter had landed on Marcus's chest like a physical thing. He pulled up a second window alongside his official project files. He began to build something that nobody had asked him to build. He had noticed, in 3 weeks of pulling data for the Croft Initiative, that the model Preston and the Singe team were using had a fundamental architectural flaw. They were measuring market gaps against national benchmarks, which were themselves skewed by coastal metropolitan data. Apply those benchmarks to secondary cities, and you were essentially measuring the wrong thing with the wrong ruler. The gaps they thought they were finding were partially real and partially artifacts of the measurement error. Marcus had mentioned this once quietly, in a project check-in, and Preston had looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has already decided not to hear something, and changed the subject. So Marcus had said nothing more. But he had kept thinking, and this morning, after the parking garage, after the laughter, after the elevator, and the promise he had made to himself, in the rising quiet, he opened a second window and began to rebuild the model from the ground up, using regional benchmarks, using granular demographic layering, using a weighting methodology he had developed himself over the past 6 years, of looking at data that people above him were too busy or too proud to look at carefully. He worked through lunch, he worked through the afternoon, he did not stop until 4:15, when his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Delgado that said Emma was home and had eaten half a banana and was watching cartoons. He sat back in his chair, he looked at what he had built. It was not a spreadsheet, it was not a formatted report. It was a complete alternative analytical framework for the Croft Initiative, and it identified 4 secondary city markets that the existing model had missed entirely, and it identified 2 markets the existing model was enthusiastically recommending that were, on closer examination, going to be catastrophic investments. He stared at it for a long time. Then he saved it to a personal encrypted drive, closed the laptop, and went home to make Emma dinner. Marcus did not move immediately. This is the thing that people who have never been desperate do not understand about the desperate. They are not reckless. Recklessness is a luxury. Recklessness belongs to men who have safety nets, men who can afford to fall. Marcus Hale could not afford to fall. He had a daughter who sang to herself in the back seat and ate half bananas and wore a ladybug backpack, and she needed him vertical, employed, and functional every single day regardless of what was happening inside his chest. So he waited, he watched, he refined. Every evening after Emma was asleep, he would sit at the kitchen table with his laptop and his cold coffee, and he would work on the framework. He ran it through every stress test he knew. He challenged it from every angle. He tried to break it the way a good analyst tries to break his own work, and he could not break it. It held. The numbers held. The logic held. The 4 markets it identified were real opportunities. The 2 markets the official Croft Initiative was targeting, with the most capital, were real disasters waiting to happen. He was certain of this the way you are certain of gravity. On day 11 he did something small and precise. He created a blind analytics submission. Vantage Capital had an internal innovation portal, a largely ignored digital suggestion box, that the HR team had set up 2 years ago under a banner of Every Voice Matters, and that had received approximately 14 submissions in its lifetime, mostly complaints about the break room refrigerator. Marcus submitted his framework to the portal anonymously. Not his name, not his department, just the work, the data, the methodology, the findings. 19 pages of the clearest, most rigorous analysis he had ever produced, formatted beautifully, argued without a single wasted sentence. He submitted it at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and then washed his coffee cup and went to bed and lay on his back. In the dark, listening to the sound of Emma breathing through the baby monitor. He still kept on the nightstand, even though she was 7, because some habits you keep, because they are really about you. On day 14, the Croft Initiative had its monthly all-hands review. Marcus sat in the back of the large conference room on the 42nd floor. He had been invited as a data support resource, which meant he sat against the wall in one of the chairs that did not have name placards, and watched Preston present the Q2 projections. The numbers looked magnificent on the slide deck. Bold font, upward arrows, the color palette of confidence. Devin Croft sat at the head of the table in his charcoal suit, and nodded with the slow satisfaction of a man watching his own vision confirmed. Marcus sat against the wall, and watched and said nothing, and kept his face neutral and professional, and thought about the 2 markets on that slide that were going to cost the company somewhere between $40 and $60 million. If nobody caught the error in time, he thought about whether that was his problem. He had tried to say something. He had been dismissed. He had submitted the framework through the proper channel. If no one read it, that was not his fault. He almost convinced himself of this. Almost. He sat with it for 3 more days and could not quite get there, because the thing about being genuinely good at your job is that you cannot fully separate the work from yourself. The error is not just a bad investment. It is a wrong thing, and wrong things sit in the body like foreign objects. On day 17, He did something he had not done in 6 years of working at Vantage Capital. He sent a direct email, not to Preston's manager. He sent it to the chief risk officer, a woman named Dr. Serena Walsh, who had a reputation for being the most technically sophisticated executive in the building, and who had been at Vantage Capital for 11 years, and who Marcus had spoken to exactly twice, both times in elevator small talk. He sent her a 3-paragraph email. He did not hedge, he did not apologize. He stated clearly that he had identified what he believed to be a material methodological error in the Croft Initiative analysis, that he had submitted a detailed framework through the innovation portal, and that he was available to discuss the findings at her convenience. He signed his name, Marcus Hale, 14th floor, Data Analytics. He sent it at 7:50 in the morning. By 10:15, Dr. Walsh's assistant had called his desk extension and asked if he was available at 2 o'clock. He said yes. He sat at his desk for the next 4 hours and worked on everything except the thing he was thinking about, which was the meeting, and whether he was about to be fired, and whether he had just done the bravest thing of his adult life, or the most catastrophically stupid. At 2 o'clock exactly, he rode the elevator to the 38th floor and walked into Dr. Walsh's office. And she was already reading the framework on her screen, her reading glasses pushed high on her nose, and she looked up at him when he came in and said, simply, "Close the door." He closed the door. He sat down across from her. She looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. Then she said, "How long did this take you?" He told her 3 weeks. She said, "Why are you on the 14th floor?" He did not have an answer for that. She turned back to the screen, said, "Sit there, I need 20 minutes. He sat. She read. Neither of them spoke for 22 minutes, and it was the most important silence of Marcus Hale's professional life. What happened next happened quickly, the way collapses happen quickly, and dawns happen quickly, the long, slow work invisible, and then the sudden light or fall. Dr. Walsh convened an emergency risk review on day 19. She did not tell Marcus what she was going to do with the framework. She thanked him for his time and said she would be in touch, and he went back to the 14th floor and sat at his desk, and pulled numbers for Preston's next presentation, and waited. He did not sleep well that week. He woke at 3 and 4 in the morning, and stared at the ceiling, and listened to Emma breathe, and made himself stay still, and trust the work. The work was good. He knew the work was good. That had to be enough. It had to be because it was all he had. On day 22, Preston called Marcus into a small meeting room, and closed the door and told him, with the tight-faced expression of a man delivering news he does not fully understand himself, that the Croft Initiative was being paused, pending a risk methodology review. Preston did not know why. He did not know who had triggered the review. He just knew that the Q2 deployment of capital into the 2 primary markets had been suspended, and that the senior team was very unhappy, and that if Marcus had any idea what was going on he should say so. Marcus kept his face still. He said he did not know. Preston looked at him for a second, longer than was entirely comfortable, and then said fine and dismissed him. Marcus walked back to his desk and sat down, and let out a long, slow breath, and felt something's loosen in his shoulders that he had not realized was there. On day 25, Marcus was called to the 42nd floor again, but this time it was not Dr. Walsh's office. It was the executive conference room. The big one, with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over all of Keller City, the one Marcus had only been inside twice before, both times to fix a display cable before a presentation. He walked in and there were 6 people seated around the table. Dr. Walsh, the CFO, 2 senior partners whose names he recognized from the company website, an outside consultant who turned out to be one of the most respected risk analysts in the regional finance industry, and Devin Croft, at the head of the table, in his charcoal suit, with an expression that Marcus had never seen on him before. Not the smooth executive certainty, not the comfortable authority, but something older and quieter and less easy. Something that looked almost like recalibration. Marcus sat in the chair. Dr. Walsh indicated and placed his hands flat on the table, and answered every question they asked him, for 94 minutes about his methodology, his data sources, his weighting system, his regional benchmark selection, his stress testing process, his findings. He answered without hedging, and without performance, and without trying to be anything other than what he was, which was a man who had done very careful work and knew it, and was not afraid to say so. At the end of the 94 minutes, The outside consultant said, directly and without preamble, that the framework was among the most technically sound, secondary market analysis methodologies he had seen produced internally at any firm of this size, and that the findings regarding the two flagged markets should be taken with the utmost seriousness. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Devin Croft looked at Marcus Hale, looked at him the way people look at something they have seen before without seeing, and said, "Mr. Hale, how long have you been on the 14th floor?" Marcus said, 6 years. Croft said, "And in 6 years, has anyone ever asked you to do work at this level?" Marcus thought about this honestly, he said. "They asked me to support it. No one asked me to lead it." Croft nodded slowly. He did not say anything else in the meeting, but the look on his face was the look of a man doing a private accounting that was coming out unflattering. The reallocation of capital saved the firm an estimated $52 million. The 4 markets Marcus identified became the new primary targets of the Croft Initiative. Within 30 days of that conference room meeting, the initiative had been restructured around his analytical framework. With his name attached as lead architect, he was promoted 3 levels in a single action, a thing that Vantage Capital had not done in its 20-year history. He was given an office on the 38th floor, 2 floors below the executive suite, with a window that looked out over the same parking structure where Devin Croft had laughed at his rusted Mustang 31 days before. Keller City Business Journal ran the story in their next issue. Not about Croft, about Marcus. They called him the analyst who saved the firm from the inside. His picture was on the cover, not a professional headshot, but a photograph a junior reporter had taken in the parking structure. Marcus leaning against the rope Mustang in his work clothes, arms crossed, looking at the camera, with an expression that was not triumphant, but was not small either. Emma saw the magazine at the checkout counter of the drugstore, where they bought her strawberry shampoo. She pointed at it and said, "Daddy, that's our car." Marcus picked up the magazine and looked at his own face on the cover, and felt something move through him that he could not name, because it was too many things at once. Rebecca, and the pigtails, and the medical bills, and the parking garage, and 94 minutes with his hands flat on a table, and the long nights at the kitchen table with cold coffee. He put the magazine back. He bought the shampoo. He took Emma's hand, and they walked out into the afternoon sun, and she started humming her private tuneless music, and he matched his stride to hers, and above them the sky over Keller City was the color of something about to clear. The particular blue that comes after the heavy weather breaks, when the air is clean, and the light is honest, and everything for a moment seems possible. He never did restore the Mustang. He bought a second car for the commute. But the Mustang stayed in the driveway, electrical tape still holding the mirror. He told Emma someday they would fix it up together, the two of them, when she was old enough to hand him tools. She thought about this very seriously and then said, "Can I pick the color?" He said she could pick anything she wanted. She said she wanted it purple. He said purple it was. She went back to her song. He stood in the driveway for a moment after she went inside, his hand on the warm metal of the hood, and he thought about the laugh in the parking garage. That big, careless, expensive laugh, and what it had set in motion. Sometimes the thing that is meant to diminish you is actually the thing that finally makes you move. Sometimes someone else's contempt is the last thing you needed to stop waiting for permission. He had been waiting 6 years. He was done waiting. He went inside to make Emma dinner. The sky above Keller City said nothing, but the whole city somehow understood.